Hi all, thanks very much for joining today. We're just going to give it a minute or two just to let some more people join, and then at about 2 minutes past 4 we'll crack on and get going, and I'll hand over to Rachel to get started. For those who've just joined though, while we give it a minute or two for everyone else to join, if you could possibly please post in the chat answering the questions on the screen just to kind of get an idea of who we've got and start some discussion. Again, we'll just give it another 1 minute or so. But yeah, please do pop in the chat kind of where you are on your mastery journey, whereabouts in the UK. Thank you for people already posting. Lovely to see you. Yeah. Lovely. Lots of people all over the country in the chat. Fab. Well, it was 2 minutes past. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Rachel in just a second. Just to do introductions, I'm Eva. I'm from the partnerships team, Art Curriculum Plus. So I deal with any kind of existing partner schools and multi-academy trusts, making sure everyone's all happy. And then also anyone who is looking to join Art Curriculum Plus's mastery programs, I can also help with the onboarding process. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Rachel to talk through Mastery Without Missteps.
Thank you, Eva. Just to check, can you see my screen moving on? Great, that is the first hurdle overcome. So welcome again. It's really lovely to have so many people joining us this afternoon, and just to know that so many people care about doing their best for their teachers and their students. So my name is Rachel Smedley. I worked at ARC for 8 years as a network lead for maths specifically. I supported the 23 secondary schools that form the ARC Math Secondary Network, and I moved into my current role in January this year. So I am now Head of Secondary Maths at ARC Curriculum Plus, and I hold the vision for Maths Mastery, the programme that is used in the ARC schools. And today I'm really excited to talk about what I learned in my network lead role at ARC, focusing on practical solutions for a successful mastery approach, really specifically in Key Stage 3. That's my passion. We know that a mastery approach, secondary maths, can absolutely transform learning. And at ARC, we've been embedding mastery-based teaching for over a decade, with several of our schools ranked amongst the country's top performers. And as the UK map with the highest percentage of pupil premium students, we've demonstrated the lasting impact of the mastery approach across a diverse range of learners. But we do know that implementing mastery isn't without its challenges, and that's what we're going to dig into over the next hour. But before we dig deeper into mastery and the mastery approach itself, I just want you to take 20 to 30 seconds to think to yourselves, what does mastery mean for you? And you might want to jot some notes down if you find that easier. So I'm just going to give you 20 to 30 seconds just to think to yourself. So mastery has been a bit of a buzzword in education over the past couple of decades, and it's been interpreted in various ways. So before we look at its meaning in education specifically, we're going to explore what the term means more broadly. According to the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, mastery today means great knowledge about or understanding of a particular thing. And if we look at closely related words to mastery, they're really interesting. So we've got the master key, that's the key that opens all the doors. The Grand Master is the highest title that a chess player can attain. A masterpiece is a piece of work surpassing excellence. And these words all share the concept of mastery as expert in some form. The concept of mastery learning first emerged in the 1960s, but in recent years, mastery itself, as I said, has become widely used and sometimes overused in education. I've heard it applied to all sorts of different approaches. Some are really quite different to what we do at ARC. And as a result, some educators have just dismissed it as just another passing trend. But at its core, Mastery is a powerful and really meaningful idea, and it's one that, when implemented well, can transform how students learn mathematics. You might have come across certain misconceptions about mastery, such as it means doing the same thing 50 times, or maybe it requires staying on the same topic indefinitely, or it's just a Singaporean or a Shanghai method, or that you can't measure progress with a mastery approach. It's simply another word for proficiency, doing well in maths. It's only for high attainers, or it's only for low attainers, or it's only for experienced teachers to use. And that's not what we mean by mastery. We define mastery as knowing you've mastered something when you can apply it to a totally new problem in an unfamiliar situation. It's absolutely not about rote repetition or rigid timelines. It's about developing deep, flexible understanding that allows students to think mathematically and apply their learning in really meaningful ways. And before we talk about practical strategies for the mastery approach, it's important, I think, to share a little about what we believe characterises mastery in maths. Now, we know that mastery doesn't mean one size fits all. It can look different for different students, but mastery is achievable for all, and that's a really key point. We've got 5 pillars of mastery at ARC, with conceptual understanding, mathematical thinking, and communication at the core, with high expectations for all and an understanding that practice is absolutely vital for building fluency, competence, and confidence. And with these as a focus, we can support students to grapple with the problem solving and apply their knowledge successfully, ultimately mastering that content. Now, our resources that we use, the Maths Mastery resources, use variation of structure so that all students have the opportunity to deepen their understanding. And the way that we introduce challenge is through further depth and not by accelerating students on to the next technique. We know that there's some main challenges facing schools who are using a mastery approach in maths. It can be really hard to cater for all of the students when there's such a range of attainment levels within the same classroom. It's hard. We know there's a national shortage of maths teachers, and that's really tricky when you want to embed a consistent approach within your department and to have teachers confidently and capably teaching accurate maths. And finally, progress in maths is absolutely important, and that can appear tricky to measure when you're using a mastery approach. So what's the solution? Well, we can approach any challenge in maths by addressing 3 key areas, and mastery in maths is no different. We need to look at what's going on in the classroom, what's going on out of the classroom, and the mindset of both teachers and students. And in this session, I'm going to share how each of these 3 key areas feed into our success with the mastery approach. So at ARC, it's really important to us that all students are engaged and successful in their maths lessons, and that they're supported in their mastery journey, whether they're low or high attaining students. We've got a mix of 39 schools across the Midlands and the South, 23 of which have secondaries which don't have set feeder schools, and that means our maths departments are working with students with really inconsistent starting points. They're all from different primary schools with a really different introduction to maths. Our schools have really diverse cohorts as well, so we've got some of the highest number of pupil premium students in the country, the highest proportion of SEN students and the second highest proportion of EAL students of the larger maths, and yet we have some of the highest attaining schools in our network. We've got schools that have significant levels of disadvantaged students, SEN students, EAL students, and everything in between. Yet our secondary Progress 8 score is consistently above average. But how do we do it? Well, all of our schools, our teachers, leaders, and educators, and the designers of the Maths Mastery curriculum work towards the same mission. And you can see it on the screen. We believe that all students, regardless of their background and their initial attainment, are entitled to a great education, to provide them with the opportunities to have real choices in life after school. It's what drives us. It drives our thinking and it drives our decisions. It's the approach that ARC takes in its support of students and the way the curriculum is designed. And we also have 4 values that describe a shared mindset across our schools. So our teachers and students are encouraged to take on challenges and also have kindness when working with others. Aiming high is role modelled in schools and it's encouraged from our students. And importantly, students and teachers of all experiences are encouraged to keep learning and be open to new ideas. And that's going to be a key theme all the way through this webinar. We support our students, as I said, in 3 main ways: through mindset of teachers and students, within the classroom and out of the classroom. And it's important to us that our students' maths education doesn't just happen when they're in lesson. The Maths Mastery resources we use in lessons are a big part of the way that we support students in their understanding. Having resources that all students can access and engage with, regardless of their attainment, is massive. We're really lucky that we have designers that have already implemented this into our lessons. And through the lesson activities, students are encouraged to talk mathematically and think mathematically, whilst learning life skills such as systematic thinking, logic, and reasoning. And in the classroom, we use multiple choice questions with really specific distractors chosen to diagnose misconceptions and common errors and give live feedback to students so they can close the gap in the moment. So let's dig a little bit deeper into our quick checks, our checks for understanding. So take this example of a simple check for understanding. We want to check that students have understood a concept, technique, or piece of knowledge. And in this case, that is what a dairy product is. I want you to take 10 seconds to think to yourself what the answer is. I'm sure you could all really easily see that milk was the right answer, and you probably didn't even need the 10 seconds. In fact, it probably felt a bit awkward sat there waiting once you had the answer, because you already knew it. You might have used reasoning. Dairy comes from animals, but a square is a shape. A house is a building, and Earth is a planet. Therefore, the only possible correct answer is milk. Fab, we've smashed it. My students know what a dairy product is, but do they? I made it really easy to answer that question. None of the other answers, the distractors, could possibly be the right answer. Not only have I led students to the answer I want them to choose, but I really wouldn't have any explanation for why they might choose a house as a dairy product. I'd just be guessing. Now, if you take this revised version, I want you to take 10 seconds again to decide on your answer. How easy was it to spot the right answer? Now, this is still a simple question, and we probably know that butter is a dairy product, so the others probably aren't, although actually in our lessons, our checks for understanding don't always just have one right answer, so we expect the children to keep thinking. Now put yourself in a classroom of 30 students holding up their whiteboards. Imagine 60% of your students answering correctly with butter. 25% of students have answered egg. 10% answered mayo and 5% answered cow. Now, what does that tell us about our students' understanding? Well, the 5% who thought cow was a dairy product likely interpreted the question as which of these produces dairy, and that's a really simple misunderstanding. We can fix that easily. For the 25% of students who thought egg was dairy, they've fallen into the trap of the common misconception. Even as adults, it's easy to confuse eggs as a dairy product. It's a product from an animal, so it stands to reason it's a dairy product, but it isn't. So we have a clear misconception to unpick with them. Not all products from animals are dairy products. And finally, I don't know what's going on my slides, I do apologise. And finally, the 10% who chose mayonnaise. So mayo looks like many of the other dairy products out there. It lives in the fridge like many dairy products. And in fact, it's got many characteristics of dairy products, but it's made from oil, eggs and vinegar, and it isn't in fact dairy. Now, the three distractors chosen tell me really quickly as a teacher the misunderstandings that my students have. I now have really useful information about the students in front of me that I can do something with. Not responding to this kind of data is like tasting a dish, realising it's too salty and then serving it to everyone anyway. You've picked up really useful feedback, but you haven't adjusted the ingredients, so the problem stays the same, and probably the meal isn't going to be that enjoyable, to be honest. Now, if you're not going to adjust the ingredients, why do the taste test? Teaching isn't just about having amazing resources or well-behaved students. It's about having teachers with skills interpreting in-class feedback. Now, teachers need to taste the dish. They need to check for understanding. They need to make note of what was wrong with the dish, identifying who was incorrect and why, and adjust the ingredients. They close the gap. A great way to close the gap is to ask a correct student and an incorrect student to explain why they selected their answers, not giving away the correct answer. Ask students to re-vote and then cold call students who changed their answer to understand why. And then finally make it crystal clear what that correct answer was and why, before giving them a second very similar question to try, why it was correct, so that then you can check students with that shadow similar question. And this can be a real mindset shift for some teachers, and so we can support them with that shift so that we're moving to mastery-based learning with no child left behind. But we're going to talk more on that in a moment. Now, Carefully planning independent tasks can support all students with the core technique modelled by giving them scaffolded tasks. Mastery isn't about students working on concepts, it's about all students accessing the same concept with different support. And that means that no student is missing out on content, no student is left behind. In our lessons, we use backwards faded questions such as this one to carefully remove the scaffolding to lead less confident or lower attaining students to work fully independently. And in the example here, you hopefully can see that we start off with a fully complete question in the pink. Then we remove the answer, but we leave the written question, and we gradually remove elements of the question until they're left with the final question to complete all on their own. And at the same time, other students work on the same skill without any scaffolding. And all students have the opportunity to grapple with worded problems and reasoning problems and problem-solving questions. But it's not restricted to just high attainers. And we do have a bank of resources for those who do work quickly and accurately, or who want that extra level of challenge. And that's not always high attainers. We have that available. And finally, it's a really great idea and quite an unusual idea for some people to place the strongest teachers in Key Stage 3 classrooms. Now, Year 11 is a huge priority, I know that, and it's really tempting to focus strong teachers in those classes alone. But we also need to recognise that building strong cohorts starts in Year 7. And by placing strong teachers in our younger classes, we're giving them the best chance possible to be successful when they get to Year 11 and onwards. Now, we also know that maths isn't something that should be restricted to the classroom. But before I talk about that in more detail, I just want you to think to yourself for 20 seconds. What opportunities do students have in your school to engage with maths outside of their lessons? Encouraging students to take part in a range of different mathematical activities can really build the confidence, the resilience, and the joy for the subject, and that's sometimes forgotten. We run axiom circles in the majority of our schools that push the top end. So these are maths clubs that focus on real world problems. They focus on reasoning and just fun in maths. And they're really well received by students in Year 7, 8 and 9. And our schools also sign their students up to the UK Maths Plus challenges. So we do also run our own network version of these maths challenges across our schools so that children can get to visit other schools and be in competition with other students from other schools, which they love, and meet other students and teachers who are really excited and who just have that love of maths. And our students also have the opportunity to go on maths camps for Year 7 to 9, which are fully funded 2-day residentials for students of all attainments. They're for the children who love to be involved. They might not be the strongest in the class, but they've got the confidence to try. And I'd liken it to putting on a school play. So we take the students that should be given the lead roles. They're really confident. But we don't just restrict our out of lesson fun to high attainers, and that's really important. Our schools are encouraged to run after school maths clubs available to anyone so that they can experience that joy of maths. And they run school-wide maths days as well, like Pi Day, where the entire school, students, staff, the canteen staff are all encouraged to take part. Loads of our schools serve pies in the canteen and they run pie bake sales and they do treasure hunts and all sorts. And it's really exciting when you go into a school and they're doing that. And finally, we recognise the importance of homework in a child's education. So Sparks is what we use, and it's changed how we think about homework. It uses an algorithm to tailor homework content to the child. It increases the challenge when they're ready, and it drops it down again when they're struggling. It's been a game changer, to be honest, and our completion levels are higher than they've been before. Raising the awareness of homework has been key to that. We flag insights on completion rates in lessons before the homework's due, and that's really helped. So taking that opportunity to go through some of the questions in class, particularly those questions that they're finding tricky, and that's flagged with Sparks, they provide those questions to you. It shows students that we care about their learning, even when they're not in school. And it's shown students that homework isn't just a piece of paper that we give to them one week and we take back in the next. We're thinking about it all the time. Now, our final approach is mindset, and we've already talked about responsive teaching and how teachers need to be open and flexible in lessons to respond to in-class feedback. But the mindset of our teachers and our students is absolutely key to a mastery approach in general. Maths, you've probably worked out already, I don't think it's something that students should purely endure. We want them to enjoy their lessons. We want them to be curious and excited about content and just realize that it isn't scary at all and that everyone can access it, but maybe in different ways. And we need to show them both in and out of the classroom that they can be successful. We don't want just passive students in our classrooms. We want to invigorate them to want to take maths. And that starts with invigorating the teachers. Now, we run network days for our teachers 3 times a year, and we train them on implementation of resources and diving deeper into specific lesson components, like the check for understanding we saw. And we just take the opportunity to celebrate maths and share good practice between schools. Now, as I said, reframing teachers' minds about maths at Key Stage 3 is so important. So those 3 years are not merely a stopgap before starting the proper work for GCSE. But if students build solid foundations in those 3 years, then mastering content and practicing applying it in those different scenarios and learning how to reason mathematically, they're going to be better set up for success when they reach their GCSEs. And that's really exciting. So we're now going to hear from Chloe, who up until recently was the head of department at ARC Pioneer Academy, and she's going to share her experience of supporting all students in the department to be successful. So bear with me while I switch across. And hopefully you'll be able to hear this. Eva, just give me a shout if you can't.
Hi, I'm Chloe. I'm a head of department at ARC Pioneer. Our academy has really quite high levels of pupil premium students and also SEN students. So it's always really important to us to make sure that all of our lessons cater to all students. So whether those are lower prior attaining students or higher prior attaining students. One of the ways in which we do this is we make sure that we use conceptual understanding. So whether that be through bar models or arrays or lots of different things, it can be really tempting when thinking about our lowest prior attaining pupils to want to strip everything back and just teach the technique. But we know that this means that the pupils won't have a mental schema in which this knowledge fits, and therefore they won't be able to retain this. By using conceptual understanding and then using mathematical talk to explore those concepts, we can really ensure that all of our pupils have the core techniques in their long-term memory so that they can use them throughout their mathematical career. This especially helps when they do leave Key Stage 3 and they move into Key Stage 4 and they're looking towards exams. This is obviously unseen assessment, and so the pupils will have the tools to apply their knowledge in unfamiliar scenarios. In our lessons, there are many moments for responsive teaching. We know that it's really important to be flexible, so it's something we discuss in department time. For example, looking at the multiple choice questions that we're going to be using in lessons and really thinking about if a range of pupils is not answering a question correctly, what are we going to be doing about that? So if many students get a question wrong, we have alternative questions ready. We can refer back to the conceptual understanding that we did earlier, or we might choose to use a class discussion. So you might choose to pick on a student who has got it correct and ask them to exemplify their answer and explain this to everyone in the classroom. We make sure that all of our lessons engage all of our pupils. So again, with the mathematical talk, it's very easy to introduce cognitive conflict, which engages our highest prior attainers, and to introduce scaffolding to support all of our LPAs, which means that all of our pupils not only experience success in the classroom, but also experience some levels of challenge throughout. Then when we move into our independent practice section of the lesson, we use scaffolded resources such as backwards faded questions so that everyone can practice the technique, and those who don't need quite as much practice still do the same technique but with less of that support there. Another way that we encourage students to enjoy maths is by using lots of extracurricular activities. For example, for our HPAs, we do the UKMT and the Axiom Circles. But for all of our pupils, we encourage them to take part in, for example, Pi Day competitions, and we take part in the ARC network maths competitions, which is really nice because it gets a bit of a buzz around school about maths and the pupils talk about it very casually, which encourages quite a lot of confidence, which then transitions into their lessons as well.
So we care about our teachers as much as our students, and we know there's a huge recruitment crisis, meaning many of our maths teachers are really inexperienced or they're non-specialist, and that can be a really scary place to be when you're put in front of 30 children and told to teach them maths. And given that we want success for all of our students, we've had to think really carefully about how to support and build our teachers so that they're confident in the classroom and teaching is consistent in each department. And ultimately, we need to ensure our students are getting the best deal in their maths education. Now, at ARC, we've got our own teacher training institute, and we also take teachers from other training institutes, such as Now Teach, and our schools therefore end up having a large proportion of teachers in training. We've got schools in the south of England, in London and in Birmingham, and maths teacher recruitment has been really tough in all of those areas. So we do have inexperienced and non-specialist teachers teaching in those schools, as well as really strong experienced teachers that have been there for decades. We've got teachers who are confident in the mastery approach, and for others, it's completely new. And it's a real mix, but it does pose a problem if we want the strongest teaching for our students. Now, I've already mentioned that I worked as a network lead for 8 years, and we've currently got 2 network leads in post. But that role for us is a really vital support mechanism for schools, and they offer a really flexible level of involvement, ranging from light touch guidance and information sharing to weekly visits that include co-planning and learning walks and running training for them. And they're especially in schools facing the greatest challenges. Network leads also coordinate the network day I mentioned earlier. They plan CPD sessions, they bring together teachers and leaders from our stronger schools to share best practice, and they also lead head of department meetings throughout the year, providing training and data analysis and just some key updates to support their everyday work. It's a really varied role, but it's one that plays a crucial part in ensuring our teachers and leaders are continually developing and striving for improvement. And as well as network leads in ARC, we also have a senior delivery manager at ARC Curriculum Plus who directly supports schools with their implementation of the Maths Mastery programme, and they lead the development of CPD and training materials from a resource perspective. So we're very, very lucky to have a bank of tools at ARC where we can support our teachers. We have 2 main challenges, though, that come with our context. There's a risk that comes with having inexperienced or non-specialist teachers in departments. We know their subject knowledge is going to be weaker than more experienced counterparts. They're not always going to be able to see the links between concepts, and students are more likely to have gaps in knowledge or walk away with misconceptions. It's common for there to be behavioural problems in classrooms, so teachers aren't able to cover the content they need to because they're fighting fires. And they probably don't have a good overview of the entire curriculum from primary school all the way up to A level. And there can be sequencing issues that come from that. And we can't assume either that experienced teachers in schools know how to disseminate their knowledge and nurture strong and confident teachers. Now, if you add to that the nervousness around the mastery approach, it will be really easy to end up with inconsistent teaching across departments. And even experienced teachers can hear the word mastery and want to run for the hills. It can really scare them. Teachers new to mastery can be really resistant to try it. That's not going to work for me. I'm going to stick to what I know, thanks. That mindset is not very helpful, but even teachers experienced with mastery can have completely different classroom practices, which is a challenge in itself. Now, what I've loved about working at ARC, and I really, really do love it, we're aware of all these challenges, and we put structures in place, and we put training in place, and we support our schools and our students to combat all of these issues. We're always thinking hard about new ways to support our teachers and our leaders in the network. We're constantly evolving. It is true that your department is only as strong as your weakest teacher. We want to remove the lottery that students have when they change teachers so that there aren't winners or losers and everyone has a consistent opportunity. We use expertise to support teachers to feel confident in their teaching before they get to the classroom. It doesn't start in the classroom. We start by making sure all teachers begin their teaching journey with a shared understanding of behaviour strategies, the mastery approach, and our high expectations for teaching and learning. So we start by addressing behavioural issues. We are really lucky. We've got an excellent training programme, which all teachers and leaders have access to. Every new and inexperienced teacher is inducted into our signature behaviour strategies, and that supports them in managing behaviour in their classrooms. And it sets the scope for actually being able to teach. Then we support our teachers to implement the Maths Mastery resources. The My Mastery platform, that's what houses the resources, those Maths Mastery resources, is run by ARC Curriculum Plus, and it hosts a range of programme-specific CPD for all different experience levels. Teachers have the opportunity to meet face-to-face for induction, or they can complete the modules online to give them the confidence to use those Maths Mastery resources effectively. And on top of that, I'm going to keep talking about Network Day, Our network days run 3 times in the year. There are training opportunities for all teachers and leaders, and there are opportunities to share good practice. But we're also really lucky that the Art Curriculum Plus team join us to run sessions specifically to train teachers in what the mastery approach is and how it works. And that's absolutely key for us. Having teachers with a shared understanding of what our mastery approach looks like means they can deliver consistent lessons using a shared language and shared pedagogy. Now, schools also receive at least 1 supportive visit a year, with the option of more if requested, and they're in regular contact with both the network lead team and the delivery team at AC+. They've got access to videos of exemplar modelling, they have guidance in getting the fundamentals right, and it's non-judgmental support to improve, really. Departments also, though, need dedicated time to work together. Apologies. They need dedicated time to work together, and that's really, really key. I'm going to scoot back because you're going to miss a key piece of information, so I'm just going to scoot back. If you don't give teachers time to improve, then you can't expect improvements. Our teachers benefit from weekly protected departmental time to collaboratively discuss content and pedagogy and a shared mastery approach, and that's essential time for ensuring consistency in teaching across the department. That's something that'd be really difficult to achieve without that structured collaboration. And having the maths mastery resources as a baseline gives teachers that strong starting point. It gives them planning time to focus on deepening pedagogical understanding and exploring how best to support all of the learners. And to support this, we offer heads of department clear guidance through the planning toolkit you can see on the screen. And that outlines a co-planning structure, which is designed to build lessons in a thoughtful and sequential way. Now, that toolkit helps departments to make the most of their planning time. It isn't just spare time to do admin. It offers advice on both the foundations of individual planning and how to lead effective collaborative sessions. And the structured approach ensures planning time is purposeful. It empowers teachers to continually improve the practice. Maths Mastery themselves also provide a planning map, and teachers can use that in dedicated planning time to further join up the thinking of everyone in the department. So having consistent messaging means that all teachers are on the same page, and that further builds consistency into their practice. It builds a shared language, so there's clarity in CPD and training, and everyone has the same understanding of what mastery looks like and the terminology used, and they can take that back to their departments. It builds confidence in teachers of all experiences because it supports the conversations so that everyone's on the same page. They can take part in conversations in their department. Schools also receive joined up support from network leads and the senior delivery manager at Maths Mastery. Now, we're absolutely working towards that same mission, and the feedback, therefore, and the communication has to be consistent. So feedback is shared between the teams and carefully planned so we don't overwhelm teachers. And it focuses on the highest leverage action step to focus improvement. And the biggest thing is that all teachers have to be receptive to feedback. We can't just give them feedback and expect them to improve. It isn't just reserved either for the inexperienced teacher. To achieve mastery, teachers and students alike need to change their mindset. They have to want to keep learning and keep growing. We're now going to hear from one of our non-specialist teachers, Rob, whose specialism is actually PE, and he started to teach Year 7 maths year and he actually fell in love with it, and he's teaching it again this year. In the video, he shares his journey in teaching maths and the support that he was given.
Hello, I'm Rob. I am from Art Kings Academy. I've been teaching for 23 years and my specialism is PE. Over these last couple of years, I have gone into the classroom to teach Year 7 with the help of my department, maths department, my network leads and the mastery slides. They've helped me to build my confidence because they're structured. They allow for me to chunk the information to pupils, which then helps them to deepen their understanding. We use a lot of whiteboards as well, many whiteboard tasks to do quick check for understanding. Through the department itself, they've been a great help in building my confidence. I was quite nervous when I went into my first maths lesson, but being able to bounce ideas, sit down through co-planning and go through all the slides has allowed me then to deepen my knowledge, improve my pedagogy and the terminology used for maths. So yeah, it's really kind of improved my knowledge of the subject but more importantly, it's allowed me to be able to reach all of the pupils, so leaving no pupils behind. In terms of the more holistic approach, I've been invited to network lead meetings where they've kind of talked to me about the long-term plans and how those slides fit in. And they've allowed me to bring my PE knowledge into the maths classroom as well. And that's been really helpful to get pupils to kind of see the links to the wider world, and how maths is so important. So one of the most important parts of my journey so far in maths is the ongoing support. So as much as the kids are going on their educational journey, I'm going on my journey with maths. So I get one-to-one coaching through the head of department, which really allows me to kind of put my stamp on the lesson as well. And we share ideas. It's never kind of you're right, I'm wrong. So that collaborative feel of putting the slides together is really important. Then I also get that through the network lead. You know, they've been great in allowing me to kind of share ideas, upskilling me as well. So, you know, I won't lie, I do go home, do a bit of homework, and get to know the lesson inside out. Therefore, then I can look for misconceptions that I might have had when I was going through the slides, but also what the pupils might have as well. And then the wider part of that, we have an open door policy. So department members will come in, they have a little quick look at the quality of my books, and things that they can take away, that they may have forgotten about, or they might look and think, oh, that's a really great approach. We'll take that and we could embed that into their own lessons. The slides are a great way to help structure your lessons. The pupil friendly, and you can really shape the lesson to help all abilities within every lesson. It's been a great experience so far. I look forward to next year. I think I'm taking a few more lessons of maths and continue to deepen my understanding of the subject area and provide a good service to the pupils that I serve.
Hopefully you can see his passion coming through. He really loves maths. He actually wants to convert to be a maths teacher now. So support doesn't just come out of class though. The network lead visits every school, as I said, and in some cases on a weekly basis, and they run learning walks, they plan with teachers, they team teach and give live coaching in class, and they run department specific CPD sessions on top of schools running their own supportive learning walks. The network lead often shares additional resources such as this depth cheat sheet to support planning for depth, so that teachers aren't accelerating students onto the next concept, but are actively thinking about how to make students think harder about the concept in hand. When we focus on the highest leverage action step in our feedback, it isn't just given to teachers and that's it. All students have a consistent approach to coaching and feedback, and it's called See It, Name It, Do It. And that involves showing the teacher the gap, modelling it, naming the specific action, and then scripting and practicing so that the teacher understands how to enact that action step. And it's been a really successful method of improving teacher practice. And every teacher has initial nerves at having to get up and practice. It makes them nervous, like it would anyone. But they love the structure now. Once they've had a practice, they just dive into it. I often get asked if I can support with teachers visiting another school to see good practice as well. And my first response is always, have you been next door? Not loads of teachers just don't think to look closer to home for good practice, and they assume it has to be happening elsewhere. It can't be in our school, but it is. And if schools operate an open door policy, it encourages teachers at all levels to visit one another's classrooms and learn from each other's practice. And that ranges from trainees and non-specialists observing and offering feedback to peers, to experienced teachers and developmental leaders opening their classrooms to colleagues. And across the board, our Keep Learning value promotes that culture of feedback and continuous improvement. And that culture for learning is absolutely key for teachers as well as students. They need the space to get it wrong, as well as the space to reflect and correct. And the best way to support high quality practice is to be in lessons. It gives leaders really valuable opportunities to identify and celebrate strong teaching. It offers timely support to those who might be less confident or consistent. And while learning walks can sometimes carry a negative association, at ARC they're framed really positively as a form of professional collaboration rather than judgment. Observing teaching isn't not about mistrust. It reflects our belief that high expectations must be matched with high levels of support. I'm just going to break off a minute just to share an anecdote, which I think encompasses this really nicely. A friend of mine once lived with a junior doctor, and that doctor told the story of a really successful consultant anaesthetist. And that anaesthetist trained loads of junior anaesthetists, and he was regarded as one of the best teachers in his field in the UK. And all of his students that studied under him were really successful and really confident. And he was so successful that actually he was joined by someone who wanted to learn from his practice. He wanted to become a trainer. They stepped into an operating theatre. Everything was going as planned. The operation was smooth as anything. And then the anaesthetist switched off the machines and stepped out of the room. And he left the training doctors to manage that emergency situation on their own. And it turned out that was his method. He threw them in at the deep end. He forced them to up their game so that the person on the table didn't die. Now, it feels far-fetched. It's true. It's a true story. His methods were so far from expected training methods, but he got the results, so no one questioned him. And if that other doctor hadn't been in the room at the time to observe his practice, that consultant's methods would not have been found out. And he was eventually reported and he was eventually struck off. But the point is this: everybody, no matter their experience or their results from the classroom, can benefit from coaching and learning walks. Everyone can. Nobody is above it. Just because people get results doesn't mean they're infallible. It doesn't mean their methods are right or that they're following procedures. So the learning walk support shouldn't be limited to early career or inexperienced teachers. It should extend to everyone, including departmental leaders. And if strong teachers aren't consistently modelling our expectations for classroom practice, even if they're getting good outcomes, they should also benefit from guidance to ensure alignment. Now, we have high expectations for everyone, it's one of our values. And a department can't thrive on the strength of just one or two individuals, because eventually those key people might move on. And we have to ensure the entire team is strong, consistent, and resilient. Your department is only as good as your weakest teacher. That is why we foster a culture of curiosity and growth, always asking, what can I learn from you? And it's important that everyone is open to learning and sharing practice. Being able to role model expectations is incredibly powerful for new teachers, but you can only do that if everyone is following those procedures, and you can only be sure that everyone is following those procedures or is open to learning the procedures if you have that open door policy embedded. I'm going to go back to Chloe now, because she's going to talk a little bit more about how she worked with her department to embrace the value of keep learning.
Other thing that we do is making sure that in department time, we make it really clear that everyone is on a continual learning cycle and everyone has something to learn as well as something to teach. So I would go on learning walks and pick out some great practice from, for example, an early career teacher, and I would ask them to then share that in department time so that everyone's learning from them. And as a head of department, I also receive coaching multiple times through the year, because no matter where we are in our career, there's always something to be learned.
And that's really common in our schools. So lots of our leaders are being coached themselves to continuously improve and reflect on their practice. Is really common. Now, the final potential challenge that schools might face using a mastery approach is measuring progress. But what does that even mean? Well, we firmly believe that progress is not about pace, but it's about depth. We don't want to rush through content as a tick box exercise, and we don't just focus on statistics to measure progress. Yes, we want all of our students to succeed, but we look more deeply at the numbers. We are interested in where gaps have been closed and whether students can apply their new knowledge in unfamiliar problems, whether they can confidently reason and deduce, and whether they can use logic to grapple with those concepts they're learning. We want progress for all. So we look at whole class trends as well as individuals so that no student is left behind. Our assessment strategy encompasses both the lessons and the network as a whole. Our resources focus on spaced retrieval and low stakes quizzing, and Maths Mastery provides planned out do now activities with questions taken from last lesson, last week, last term, and last year to carefully recall content. And we know that memory is the residue of thought, and having spaced retrieval is key to students' retention. We also interleave previously taught content into lessons. So, for example, we cover 2D shapes, an area, and then we reinforce that in our fractions unit by asking area questions using fractional side lengths. The sequence of learning that Maths Mastery has in place has been really carefully planned to enable us to do that. I've already shown you the diagnostic checks for understanding that every lesson includes, but there's also 2 other types of assessment. A multiple choice pre-unit quiz to support teachers in closing gaps in the fundamental content needed for the next unit. And we also give guidance for teachers on next steps if students get the questions wrong. And there's also a post-unit assessment to check all students are successful in the core knowledge from that unit. And time is provided in the curriculum if they need to reteach anything. We've also moved from summative testing throughout the year to having more regular formative assessments because we recognise the power of diagnostics in supporting students to success. At Key Stage 3, we use diagnostic assessments at the end of autumn and spring, and they're both ungraded. And then we have 1 graded summative assessment at the end of the year to begin to prepare students for that style of assessment they're going to see at GCSE. And the assessment structure is used to support and ensure mastery. It's not just to assess and analyse the data. It isn't just a tick box. For us, the analysis is just the start. The follow-up after the data analysis is a really key piece to ensuring mastery. But of course, the assessments that are used have to be in line with the content that we're teaching. And ours are. They are completely in line with the Maths Mastery curriculum so that we're assessing the right things at the right time. To have a consistent approach to understanding assessment analysis and response to data, everyone has to be on the same page. You're probably seeing a theme at this point. We mean making sure everyone has an understanding of the purpose of each assessment, why we're giving that assessment at that time, how to analyse the data, and then how that data should be used. But they also have a shared understanding of what progress looks like. It isn't just about numbers. It's not just about high percentages and high grades. It's about lots of other things. We ensure all our schools, teachers and leaders are confident in analysing their own class and department data by running CPD, we run in-school training, and we have assessment deep dives. And we also support the marking of our end of year summative assessments by running standardisation sessions so that we know that the data we have is really reliable. And so often schools expect progress within a department without giving them any time. If we want them to raise their game, we have to give them time. Just as we give our schools planning time together, we also give leaders dedicated time in assessment deep dives, and they can step away from the everyday bustle of running the department and they can focus solely on data analysis. The information, the resources we provide for our schools is intended to make analysis and follow-up more efficient, and it should minimise the workload as well, which is always a win. In our assessment deep dive sessions, we run these for head of department and key stage leads. That's really important. We show high-level network data, such as the common misconceptions to be aware of. We also provide analysis documents to support their thinking and plan gap closures with their teachers. And there's also opportunities to collaborate with other heads of department. They don't get that opportunity very often in their day-to-day life. So we offer that. And we offer that chance to share ideas and connect with others working on the same misconceptions. And then we give them clear guidance so that heads of department are really clear on ways to support their departments and their individual teachers to improve. We don't just expect heads of department to be taking charge. Everyone at ARC has responsibility for their assessments and for their progress. That is on every teacher. And we also encourage teachers and leaders to make notes of areas of weakness in their schemes of work ready for next year so that topics can be addressed in co-planning the following year to avoid making any of the same mistakes. We don't expect teachers, though, to reteach everything in the moment. We know that teaching one-off reteach lessons is not going to close gaps. Children aren't going to remember it. So we ask our teachers to think really carefully about when they might reteach that content. And we support schools to address those gaps systematically by sharing a topic mapping document. And we encourage them to consider not only the topic, but the type of question, so that they're looking at the specific misconception, and rather than doing a blanket reteach on the topic, they can address that specific issue. And also, we ask them to think about the type of question it was, whether it was a particularly tricky question, whether it was a worded question or a reasoning question, rather than the topic itself always being the issue. If it was a problem-solving question, do they need to teach students a strategy for approaching problems? Do we need to teach them how to get the first 2 marks in those problems to start with? There's lots of ways of approaching reteach, and it's not just blanket reteach. We also ask schools who have outperformed other schools on trickier questions what their approach was, so that we can share good practice and support other schools to progress in those topics. And we really do encourage collaboration between schools because that's the power of the network we're in. We're really lucky with it. Now, we use 2 key analysis tools for our network assessments, and the first is SmartGrade. And SmartGrade is an incredibly powerful tool for data gathering and analysis of data at a pupil, class and cohort level within school. But we also use it to compare schools' performance within the Arc Schools Trust. The Maths Mastery resources are all aligned with the SmartGrade platform, and that makes it really easier to gather data. But the beauty of using the Maths Mastery materials has been that we can compare our data with the data from hundreds of partner schools, and that gives us a benchmark to know where we stand on a more national level. We're able to see percentile ranks and raw scores, but we're also able to see topic level detail, both for individual schools, which you can see on the screen, and for individual students if we want. And we can look at the distractor level, so which of the answers students chose for multiple choice questions, and the question level detail for each. So I've got it here at a school level, but you can also see it at student level data for all of these. And at ARC, we also have our own data dashboard called CCR. It stands for Click, Click, Report. And that draws the data from SmartGrade and shows it in a different way for even quicker analysis. So we can quickly compare schools visually. We can quickly see which students struggled with questions and which questions were trickier, which they found easier. And we can also see a heat map, and this is our teacher's favourite, to be honest. It's a heat map of all the questions and the schools' averages. So the schools are along the top and the questions are down the side, and then the average completion rate, the correct answers are the colours, the heat map. And we can see which questions posed a problem. So in this case, it was question 10, and whether any schools were successful with those trickier questions. So you might be able to see school E and school F were more successful with question 10. They're in green, the others are in the orangey salmon colour. And you can also see whether schools struggled with questions that others found manageable. So, for example, school I struggled with question 13, but none of the other schools did. And that's really key for schools. They want to know that data. They want to use that data to have impact and make change in their schools. And finally, schools can quickly analyse data for classes using a similar heat map. They can identify where some classes are underperforming compared to others. And it's pointless having all of the data to hand, of course, if we don't do anything with it. So our teachers use all of this data to plan reteach to close gaps. And as network leads, we analyse where schools are performing well on certain topics and which schools aren't performing well. And then we can draw on the strength of those schools who have performed well to share their expertise and to support schools who are underperforming. And we also go in and support schools who are underperforming. And heads of department who are more focused on their school's performance can analyse whether their department's performance based on the rest of the network showed they were underperforming or overperforming. And then they can identify key gaps to work on with their teams to close. So the final piece of the puzzle, though, is supporting feedback with assessments. Now, teachers are really clear at ARC that the purpose of assessment is to identify gaps and to understand students' comprehension of the content. They know how to identify gaps. We train them on it all the time, and they know how to find the trends in the data. They're not just looking at numbers. And they understand that to close gaps, they have to respond to them in lessons. One of the ways that they respond is using a feedback sheet. So these feedback sheets are used to close gaps within a class. They raise awareness to students as well of their key weaknesses, and they address common mistakes. And it hones teachers' thinking using these maps. They focus on small misconceptions rather than reteaching those whole topics, and it gives students really specific practice on those gaps. It's been actually really effective at addressing weaknesses from in-class assessments, and the kids seem to love it. They're really engaged in these lessons. Even the lessons where you've got some trickier students, they're really engaged in these particular lessons. So next time you're considering maths in your context, I want you to think to yourself, how am I supporting my department with their in-class practice? How am I supporting teachers and students out of the classroom? And how am I nurturing a growth mindset for my teachers and students so I can get the best from them? Thank you so much for listening. There's been a lot of information, I know that, but I'm now going to hand back over to Eva, who's got a little bit more information for you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Literally just super quick from me. Thank you everyone for coming along today. If you are interested, if you're not currently a partner school and you are interested in hearing more about joining potentially the Maths Mastery programme, please do email via partnerships, but also you can go directly to the Maths Mastery website using the QR code there, access the programme preview, which has some sample resources, again with the QR code. And then also we've got some more webinars coming up as well with some further information on the Maths Mastery programme specifically. on the 21st of May and the 3rd of June. So again, you can register using the code there. But that is everything from us. If you do have any questions, please do feel free to pop them in the chat very quickly. If not, please do just email them over to partnerships@artcurriculumplus.org.uk. But if you need to shoot off now, thank you very much for all attending.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening. Thanks, Esther. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
We've not had any questions through, Rachel, so shall we leave it there?
Yeah, sure. I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.